The unsurpassed, penetrating and perfect truth is seldom met with, even in 100,000 myriad kalpas. Now we can see and hear it. We can remember and accept it. I vow to make the Buddha's truth one with myself. Homage to the Buddha, homage to the Dharma, homage to the Sangha. Today I'm going to talk about Mishaka, the sixth ancestor. And first a little story about his meeting with Daitaka. One day Daitaka said, the Buddha said, when one pursues the supernormal powers of a rishi or devotes himself to the study of the lesser vehicle, he becomes like someone entangled in and dragged along by a rope. Know for yourself that when you leave such rivulets behind, you immediately arrive at the great ocean. By all means, confirm the unborn for yourself. Mishaka, as a result, had a great awakening to his true self. So Mishaka was a spiritual teacher who had 8,000 followers, rishis, which means sages actually, people who really trained themselves in certain ways. But these all cultivated supernormal powers, sorcery actually. But he had 8,000 of these fairly, respectable, in a way, followers. So he himself was a pretty prestigious person having 8,000 followers. And he visited Daitaka along with all of these followers. And he told him that they had a karmic connection together from a previous life. And after this life, Daitaka had become a Buddhist and learned to meditate. And Mishaka had cultivated supernormal powers. And Daitaka agreed, he saw the connection too. And he told Mishaka he should abandon this cultivation of supernatural powers and follow the way of the Buddha. And Mishaka agreed, and Daitaka ordained him as a monk and gave him all the precepts. And at first all the 8,000 rishi followers were conceited and arrogant. But Daitaka, as Kezan says, displayed his great spiritual faculties. Maybe he upstaged them and did even more supernatural powers than they did. Maybe it was the only way to get their attention and respect. The Buddha said, don't do this, don't cultivate supernatural powers. And he himself did a great display when he came to his hometown because, prophet in his own country, they sort of thought, oh, here's old Gautama. And in order to get their attention, he did some supernatural thing. But he said, this is really not what you want to do. Every now and then, though, maybe it seemed to be necessary. And in this case, Daitaka displays his great spiritual faculties, and as a result, all the rishis are deeply impressed, and they all become monks and receive the precepts. They just leave behind their conceit and arrogance. And then Daitaka said what we first read. When one pursues the supernormal powers of a rishi, or devotes himself to the study of the lesser vehicle, he becomes like someone entangled in and dragged along by a rope. Know for yourself that when you leave such rivulets behind, you immediately arrive at the great ocean. By all means, confirm the unborn for yourself. And Mishaka, as a result, has this great awakening to his true self, just hearing this. So although Mishaka was the leader of these 8,000 followers, right in front of all of them, he puts it all down, asks Daitaka for his help, and receives the precepts. He immediately sees Daitaka as somebody who can teach him. And all his followers do the same. After a little bit of conceit and arrogance, they think, this person is worthy of respect, he's worth following, and to do the same thing. They put down all their powers and their prestige and receive the precepts. They're willing to change their views and accept the Dharma right there and then. And this is pretty impressive, just right there and then, put it all down. There's something better. I'm going to go to this. Leaving it behind. Now, cultivating spiritual powers is very dangerous. It can harm oneself and it can harm other people. And this is why, as soon as they relinquished their spiritual powers and their sorcery, they needed to receive the precepts. Because the precepts help to keep us safe from doing harm. And as soon as they took the precepts, they had to completely turn away from their old ways, completely relinquish this cultivating of spiritual powers. Now, having spiritual powers is one thing, but cultivating them is a bit of another thing. I'll go on to that in a minute. Now, Keizan goes on to talk about cultivating spiritual powers, supernormal powers, and says how they're limiting. This cultivation is a limiting thing because they're actually based on a self that wants something. He says it's like being stuck in a rivulet rather than finding the great ocean of Buddha nature, stuck in a little side channel. You're still in the samsara of heavens and hells and rebirth. You're not free, you're not liberated. You're still bound by the smallness of mind, being a self. He says it's like being entangled in a rope and dragged along by it. The person may think they have power, but actually they're enslaved by it. You have your rope, but you get entangled up in it, and then you're dragged along by it. You're not free. And this is decidedly not liberation, says Keizan. Now, most of us don't have to worry about our supernormal powers. But some people do have them. And they have to be extremely careful for a number of reasons, what they do with them. They have to be really careful. Some people have them naturally. And it's not the same as cultivating them. Deliberately to cultivate supernatural powers is extremely dangerous. So if you happen to have any of these special powers, be very, very careful and please don't cultivate them. And people do, some people do, but it doesn't make the person some specially wise person or specially spiritual. They just happen to have this. It's just an attribute. It's not something to identify with or say, well, I am this special person, I have this. So for the rest of us, for all of us actually, what is our equivalent thing that we might identify with? What gives us a feeling of being somebody? I'm a teacher or an administrator or a doctor or a therapist or a whatever. The thing we might identify with as being somebody. And if it's gone, then what are we? If we retire or lose our job or we need to make a change and do something different, can we just let that identity go, as it were? Sometimes it's quite hard for someone to stop being a something when there's time to let it go. Because we identify with what we do, whether it's a relationship, a wife, a mother, a sibling, or a husband, father. It's something we identify with, something we label ourselves with, something that gives us a sense of worth, in a sense. And that's not reality. Or other attributes we might have. I might be a little proud of them, perhaps. I'm very intuitive, or very spiritual, or very intelligent, or well-educated, or very good at such and such. We all have things that we're good at and things we might be just a little proud of. It's helpful to think with all of these chapters in terms of how does this apply to me in my own training? I may not have supernormal powers, but what do I have that's equivalent or comparable? Or in what way do I identify myself with some special thing, some special attribute, something I'm really good at, something I think of as me, the so-and-so, What can I see in this? Otherwise, it's just a story about somebody else long ago, and we kind of miss how we can apply it to ourselves. We don't have to figure it all out in a certain way, but just to sort of reflect. How can I put this into practice in my own life? What does it mean for me? And now Keizan goes on and he talks about the limitations of the lesser vehicle. which means the Hinayana, the smaller vehicle. It sounds kind of rude, and it's a slightly rude term. Training just for oneself is what it means. Trying to get enlightenment for oneself. Sometimes people think the lesser vehicle or Hinayana means Theravada, and it doesn't. It's not the same thing. People mistake that. Hinayana just means lesser vehicle as opposed to Mahayana, the great vehicle, the Bodhisattva path, training for other beings as well as oneself. Compassion, helping all beings. And Keizan says, this lesser vehicle is still training within body and mind, within the duality of delusion and enlightenment. It's training to get something for oneself. Training for oneself, to get enlightenment, to get something. And still, after training in this way for a long time, eventually the person does come to the way of the Bodhisattva, training for the benefit of all beings. And again, we can see ourselves in this as well. Usually, we begin to train and meditate because we want something for ourselves. We want to deal with our own suffering, or we want enlightenment. And this is fine. You've got to start somewhere. As Reverend Master used to say, we always start on the me side. We don't immediately start saying, I want to train for the benefit of the whole universe. It's a bit inflated, you know. Usually we need to just help ourselves out of a mess and to see that realistically. And then, after a while, as we train, we develop more compassion and sympathy for other beings. The four wisdoms, charity, tenderness, benevolence, and sympathy, we naturally develop them and we cultivate them as we train in the way of the Bodhisattva, helping all beings. But we start on the side of me. This is normal. And then Keizan talks about all the various kinds of effort in training that are based on views and opinions. And some of them don't sound too bad when you think about them, but they're based on a me. This is what he's talking about. Destroying defilements, going back to the root, waiting for enlightenment, keeping to the rules. Well, there's nothing wrong with these. There's nothing wrong with keeping to the rules, the laws of the land. We do that. There's nothing wrong with dealing with our defilements. Of course we have to do that, to deal with our greed, anger and delusion. It's all fine. But it's limiting our efforts by our views of a me. This is what he's talking about. The self, my training, my defilements, just me. And we can get stuck with just me and my stuff and kind of miss the bigger picture. Even longing for emptiness is a trap, he says, because we can misunderstand the real emptiness. It's doing it from the point of view of a little self, trying to train itself, trying to perfect itself, trying to purify itself, and missing the bigger thing. I think this is what he's pointing to. It's not the things in themselves. It's doing it from the point of view of me and my views about training. So you might think at this point, well, what do we do? And Keizan says, don't worry about all this stuff. It's all based on a self. He says, look to the real truth, the great ocean, Buddha nature, far beyond this little self and its views about training and perfection and all that. And he says, do you believe that because you are a somebody, i.e. a me, a person, a being, a separate thing, I'm a somebody, do you believe that because you're a somebody, there is any need to speak of before birth and after death? What past, present and future exists? Just like he was saying yesterday. Don't cling to past, present and future. For vast eons there has never, not even for a second, been any disparity. From birth to death there is only that which is. Nevertheless, if you do not personally experience it at least once, you will be led by your senses and their objects into vain delusion, without your ever knowing the true self. You will be alienated from that which is right before your eyes. You will not know from whence arises body and mind, or understand where the myriad phenomena flow out from. For no apparent reason you will decide to sweep away one thing and desire to seek after another, confused and inconstant, because we have our little views about training. It says, you are neither in real darkness, the real darkness of ignorance, nor are you in real contact with the truth, but idly reside within your own opinions and judgments, discriminating between right and wrong. He's haranguing us. And every time he does this, he harangues us like this, then he turns around and says, don't worry, you have what you need, you don't lack anything, you can do it, you just have to get on with it. And he does it here too. He says, do you not realize that all of you respond when called to and go where you are pointed toward? Beyond question, the you, i.e. that which responds, is the Lord of the house, Buddha nature. That Lord has neither countenance nor bodily features, yet there is no time when he ceases to move. We are all part of that. As a result, this Lord comes forth and is given the name of body, appears like individual beings, appears like the individual separate selves, and yet we are all actually just part of the great matter, the Lord of the house. Therefore, from the coming into birth to the going into death, there is never a moment when you lack anything, never a moment when you have any excess. With such birth and death as this, though you are born, your birth has no beginning. Though you die, your death leaves no traces. You are no different from waves in the ocean which rise and fall, leave behind no mark, yet never cease in their rising and falling. They subside, yet in their subsiding they go to no special place. Such is the ocean. Large and small waves arise ceaselessly. This is one of his favorite metaphors, the wave and the ocean. I'm very fond of it too, because it's so helpful. We're like waves in the ocean. We arise and we fall. You see the wave. It looks like a separate thing, but it's only part of the water, part of the sea. And it's clearly not a separate thing. It arises, it travels for a while, then it falls back into the ocean. Just like us, we're not separate. A really helpful analogy. And he goes on. The Lord of the house, Buddha nature, is no different. Never does he cease in his moving. He manifests himself as skin, flesh, bones and marrow, and uses himself as the four elements and the five skandhas, i.e. our own body and mind. We are just part of this. As the scripture says, you are not him, he is all of you. We are all part of that. He functions as wearing clothes and eating food, and operates as speech and action, i.e. in our daily life. He divides, and though divided, i.e. looking like separate beings, is not separate from himself. We look like separate beings, but we are just part of one being. And now, as we know, Keizan uses many different terms for Buddha nature. And some of them sound quite personal. The Lord of the house, that person, the true self, and so on. And some of them sound more universal. Dharma nature, the ocean of original nature, truth, this, that is, and so on. There are many different names for it. We all tend to see it or think of it or relate to it in different ways. Some of us in a very personal way, and some of us in a more general way. And I think Keizan uses all these different terms in the hope that at least one of them will strike home for each of us, something for everybody. If Dharma nature doesn't work for us, well, maybe Lord of the house will, or vice versa. Something that resonates with us, and you think, That's what he's talking about. Because all of us have a sense of it, really. Something in us knows there is that which is greater than me and my stuff. And I am just part of it. And we're constantly trying to come back to this, to remember this, to see it for ourselves, to really know it through and through. And Keizan's just trying to get it across in whatever way he can, in all these different ways, many different terms for Buddha nature, whether it seems like a personal thing or cosmic emptiness, however it works for us. Where are we? Buddha nature appears, and though visible, is not limited to any physical form or by any characteristic. It resembles a stage illusionist performing various illusory arts, or someone giving rise to various images in a dream. Within a mirror, 10,000 forms may go through 1,000 changes. But if you don't know that it is still only a mirror, and therefore vainly pursue supernormal powers, or devote yourself to the study of the lesser vehicle, you have no chance of being liberated. Because it's just illusion based on the idea of a self. There are all the many appearances in the mirror of our mind, or devoting oneself to perfecting a self, looking for enlightenment for oneself, trying to get something for oneself. It's just the illusory idea of being a separate being, not the reality. Now Keizan kind of takes off. O monks, all of us, nothing fetters you, so what need is there to be released? From the first there has been no delusion or enlightenment, no bondage or liberation. Is this not what the unborn is? Is this not what the great ocean is? Where are there any rivulets, all lands countless as the particles of dust, or as the atoms in those particles, are the ocean of the Dharma realm? The flowing forth of valley streams, the cascading of waterfalls, the snaking of rivers, are all but lively shifts on the surface of this ocean. It's all water, the same water, all part of it. There is no rivulet to abandon, no great ocean that need be gained. And as this is the way it is, all Mishaka's misunderstandings straightened out on their own, and his former opinions all at once changed. He saw the unreality of what he was doing. He abandoned his pursuit of supernormal powers and became a monk, which is just an emergence of his past life karma. He'd been headed this way all along, but he took a detour into supernormal powers, doing something that wasn't helpful. If you practice in this way, says Keizan, come what may, so that what is in your mind corresponds with what you say. So you know what you're doing, you know what you're saying what is true. It will truly be like old and dear friends meeting face to face, self nodding to self, Buddha nature nodding to Buddha nature. Buddha recognizes Buddha. All of you will swim together in the ocean of original nature, without ever, not even for an instant, being separated or estranged from each other. A great Master Baso says, no sentient being for untold eons has ever left the samadhi of Dharma nature. Since we are always in the samadhi of Dharma nature, we wear clothes and eat food, we converse and make respectful replies, where the functionings of our six sense organs and all our activities are without exception nothing but the Dharma nature. All that we do, all that we say, talking to each other, eating food and wearing clothes, all the things that we do in daily life, they're just the activity of Buddha nature. And Keizan says, hearing this, don't make a mistake. Do not take it to mean that sentient beings have an existence within a Dharma nature, as separate entities. To distinguish between Dharma nature and sentient being is like distinguishing between water and waves. We may use the words water and waves in our speech, but really, how much difference is there between the two? Waves are just part of the water. We use different words, but it's really the same thing. And we can get confused by thinking of sentient beings and Buddha nature, but really, it's the same thing. We're just part of Buddha nature. We're not little bubbles within a Buddha nature, like little islands in the flow. We're all part of it, dissolved within it. And to constantly come back to that. Then he says, this morning, in order to explain what is happening in the story here are once more my humble words. Do you in the community wish to hear them? And he says, even though there may be an everyday purity, silt clear as a river's water in autumn, how can it possibly compare with a luminous spring night, the moon softened by haze? Many are the houses where people thus speak, yearning for a spotlessly clean life. But however much they sweep this way and that, their hearts are still not emptied and clear. Their hearts are still not emptied and clear. People are still stuck in their views and opinions, still trying to get something, sweeping this way and that, trying to purify something or get rid of something, looking for something, missing that which is so much bigger than our little ideas of purity. The moon of Buddha nature, softened by haze, not always clear to us, but always there. And still we do our best to train ourselves, to keep to the precepts, to meditate, but without trying to grasp something, sweeping this way and that, yearning for a spotlessly clean life. If we can just do our best to do our training, not trying to grasp, not trying to get something, not yearning for something, relinquishing our little views about me and my training and what that means or what it is, to open up and entrust ourselves to the great ocean of Buddha nature, the great ocean of the Dharma realm. We pledge ourselves to it. We open up to it. We meditate and keep to the precepts in order to be one with it and to know that we are one with it, because of course we already are, but to know that, to live by that, to pledge ourselves to it. That is what we try to do. Homage to all the Buddhas in all worlds. Homage to all the Bodhisattvas in all worlds. Homage to the scripture of great wisdom. Tomorrow we'll talk about Buddhadhanandai.